I know you won't get slow down, feels the no good, funky knuckle groove. Baby, 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 that'll help for you. Yeah, it's most definitely on a roof.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Christopher Burrows. I'm with the Bowery Presents. This panel is Parks and Recreation, not the television show that we all know and love. But what we're going to talk about today are some of the inherent challenges of producing shows in alternative venues in public spaces, basically outdoor events. Our distinguished panel here has vast experience in conducting such shows. I'll let you introduce yourselves so everybody knows who you are, so on and so forth.
Sure. My name's Jack Walsh. I'm the executive producer of the BRIC Celebrate Brooklyn Festival, which is celebrating its 40th year at the Prospect Park Band Show in Brooklyn. I am one of these strange characters who have been kind of doing the same thing for a very long time. So I've worked on this festival from almost the beginning and have worked in all facets of it, programming, production, sponsorship. You know, it's been a great experience, and I get to walk home after all of our shows. And I think I've tried to count. I've probably done about 1,500 outdoor shows over all those years. So we have a little to talk about.
Good morning, everybody. I'm John Dindas. I'm the president of G4D Productions. We do a vast array of gigs. I think I was picked for this panel because we have done things on the National Mall in DC, in Central Park in New York, at various minor league ballparks, at summer camps, as well as more traditional outdoor festival venues like Lock-In. So let's see what happens.
Good morning. My name is Tom Russell. I am the co-founder and partner of Founders Entertainment. We do the Governor's Ball and the Meadows Festival here in New York City, and we do a number of other things for hire, and that's me.
Good morning. I'm Kurt Steelman, president of Steelman Production Services, Inc., up in Boston. We focus mainly on production management and labor contracting. We handle Fenway Park, SNHU Arena. I've done a few festivals here and there.
And I'm Erika Elliott. I'm the executive artistic director of the SummerStage Festival in Central Park, but we also produce festival shows around the city, all 5 boroughs, about 100 parks, but the biggest ones, there's about 13 core parks. We also produce the Marionette Theater in Central Park and Charlie Parker Jazz Festival.
Great, thank you. For most of you that don't know, producing outdoor shows creates a whole nother, let's say, ball of wax in terms of things that you have to deal with that you don't have to deal with when you're in a standard venue such as Brooklyn Bowl here or any four-walled venue. Can you guys kind of elaborate some of the challenges that producing an outdoor show that you have to deal with, city bureaucracies being one of them in particular?
Should we all just say weather at the same time?
I know, I was going to say weather,
Be done with
number
it?
one.
Yeah. I mean, it pretty much starts and ends there, but no, there are a lot of them. But yeah, it starts with the weather. You never know what you're going to get. But there are a lot of other things in terms of laying out a site, the topography, the things that you have to deal with on a day in, day out basis to get set, to do what you do. It's the unknown. You know, when you work in a room like this or T5 or the Capitol Theater, you come to work every day, and the biggest unknown is the band. Is what the band's going to come in with, personality-wise or gear-wise. But for the things that we do, it starts with the weather and kind of ends with the weather. But in between, there are a lot of other things that have to be taken into account in terms of staffing and infrastructure and other things. I mean, some of the biggest festivals in the world build a city. I mean, you literally go to a big flat area or a park, and you start with load in, and you build a city, and then you invite 25 or 50,000 people, and then you tear it down. So there is a city planning. There are a lot of things that go into it that I think you don't get day in, day out in a venue.
In particular, if you're doing stuff in a park where Jack and Erika would have some insight into what are the challenges of dealing with New York City's bureaucracy in terms of putting on shows in Central Park or Prospect Park.
Where do you want to start on that one? Jack, you can start, and then I have some other thoughts, I'm sure.
All righty. Well, it's interesting, Erika, because I kind of think of like the City Parks Foundation as having a special relationship.
Maybe we're just special, Jack.
Yes. Things have changed in New York City. When we started this festival 40 years ago, it was sort of a revitalization project. New York City and Brooklyn was that kind of graffiti-covered subway car that you think about in, New York in the 70s. And the idea was to kind of bring people back into parks at night, which was kind of a radical idea. And the city was very much a part of it and very much a partner in it and very much facilitated it. And now it is quite the opposite. I think the biggest thing for all of you professionals out there is to understand that the city has zero tolerance for liability. Everything is on you. That's really kind of the rule of law right now. They are just pushing off any exposure in every way, and that kind of trickles down through every single agency. I used to deal with the Parks Department. That was it. Now it's the Fire Department, the Buildings Department, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and it goes on and on. So it's really, really changed, and I think the bar is quite high, especially for any new entries into New York City, and of course sites are very, very scarce. So that's just kind of scratching the surface.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, and part of what you allude to, Jack, is that City Parks Foundation does have a unique place within the park system in that we have a longstanding partnership and have access to parks to present free programming. And I think one thing that we think a lot about at my organization is really giving access to people and parks and empowering them to take use of their parks and what that means and what communities can participate in activities in parks and have access to that. That's a lot of why we exist. Free, no barrier arts and culture in all 5 boroughs. What I think is really interesting about the current administration, the Commissioner of Parks right now, is really focused on equality and bringing lots of programming in equal measure to all 5 boroughs and not just Manhattan and not just certain parks. And we're a big part of that on many levels, doing programming, not just arts and culture, but sports and education and getting New Yorkers involved in their parks. But, the unique aspect of a public space is like who has access to it, who has ownership of it, who is allowed to get a permit, who isn't. There's a lot of bureaucracy related. I think it has everything to do with how you do the work, that it should come from the community. So if you're producing an event in a community, don't just go and apply for a permit. Meet with the community board, for example. Meet with the stakeholders. Meet with the parks group that have been actively trying to clean up or get activities in those parks, right? Because a lot of what you're seeing now is because of the scarcity, there's a lot of attention on what's happening in parks and a lot of communities being really vocal that they don't want certain things. And we've all touched on that.
I'd love to hear Tom bounce off that one because you guys have a very different arrangement than we do.
We do. Where to begin? So on Randall's Island, we deal with so many agencies, and I feel like it grows every single year. It started off just dealing with the Randall's Island Parks Alliance, and everything went through them. And as we grew there, we started to deal more with the NYPD, specifically the 25th Precinct. And as we kept growing, we started dealing with people at 1PP, One Police Plaza, FDNY, DOB, Counterterrorism, Department of Homeland Security, OEM. Honestly, it feels like there's a new agency that pops up every year, but all for good reason, right? Their priority is safety and security and making sure that the producer has their ducks in a row to make sure that it's a safe event for everyone. And we totally welcome them. We know that whatever they say is the rule, is the law, but we want to, help supplement their efforts, complement their efforts, and make sure that it's as safe as it possibly can be for artists, for staff, and the patrons. In light of current events, there is even more of an eye on public events and parks, and for good reason again. And we just want to make sure that we are as safe as we possibly can be. It's not easy, and the amount of last-minute emails, phone calls, emergency meetings that we have to have, I can't even tell you how often that happens, but it's just part of the nature of doing events in a major market in this day and age.
Kurt, I know you are up in Boston and kind of deal with Fenway and stuff like that. Are there any challenges with staging shows in a ballpark of a historic nature as Fenway Park, being a Cubbies fan?
The folks at the park are great to work with. Boston, definitely. Municipalities, they're challenging. It's a great park to work in. Great team over there. I would say that the probably municipalities are definitely the largest challenge here. Yeah.
The only thing that I would want to add, just for perspective, since most of us are doing mainly things on the East Coast, and certainly New York, is that when I talk to colleagues in other markets, like Los Angeles, for example, I think they have even more red tape than we do. We don't pay PD, for example, for extra coverage. In LA, they do. There's other things that other cities, and I think we're inherently in New York particularly, really want people to use their public spaces. Most other cities aren't super into that. They're not really about massive crowds gathering in public spaces for whatever historical legacy, particularly in Los Angeles. So, I think there's a lot of red tape and there is a lot of bureaucracy, but it's a city that's built on parades and public events. And as much as there's a lot of layers to it, and it has to be really buttoned up, that in general, this city is really supportive of public events in ways that sometimes other cities are not. So as hard as it is, I think we're still pretty lucky to be doing it here.
I think an interesting city is DC. You talk about the politics. There are two layers of politics in doing shows on the National Mall or any of the parks in the city proper. The first is the politics of doing the show, and then it's the politics between the National Park Service and whatever administration is there, and it changes. It's a lot of it is personal. A lot of it is, goes way beyond you, and you have to just kind of ride along and say, okay, well, I'm going to kind of place my bet on this horse, and they're going to get us to the finish line. And then you talk about, a city wanting to have the crowds and the events. The last three parks directors that I've worked with don't really want to deal either. But it's Washington, D.C., so it's our nation's capital, and they have to. So that's, I haven't done them in L.A., but on the East Coast, the most challenging for me is D.C. because obviously it's it's the federal government that you're dealing with, but also there seems to be this inherent, back and forth within the group itself, which leaves you sometimes saying, okay, you guys figure out what you want to do, and then we'll put on our event. So that's a challenge that's specific to D.C., but an interesting one to
navigate. But true here too, right? Because sometimes you'll get green lighted and permitted through parks and have all your ducks together, and then PD will just decide because maybe there's some other issue going on in that park or that neighborhood. It's happened to us on many occasions where they just feel like, hey guys, this park isn't safe, we don't want you guys doing events, and we have everything, and then we have to move it up the chain and go to One Penn Plaza and get, the council member and everyone involved to say like, no, this is gonna happen, like, we can have extra security, we'll do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable, but this event should still happen.
I think that's the key for all of us with these people, because as Tom said, they're all doing their job, and they're doing their job for a reason, to keep us safe. Once you get to a certain point and you have your ducks in a row, you just keep saying, okay, this is going to happen. What do I need to do to make it happen? To help you do your job. And I think that's a lot of it, is just saying, okay, we're going to do this, and you tell us what we have to do. And there is a force of will that you need to have to kind of get it down to the goal line.
One interesting challenge is, knowing exactly whose call it is, whatever that call is. You don't want to go above or around somebody because it could bite you in the butt for many years to come. So if somebody from Parks is saying something, but it's really a PD issue, and it's somebody from the local precinct who, has a grudge or has a strong feeling when somebody above that person may have a totally different feeling. Knowing how to navigate the politics of everything, which is what you said, is very challenging and makes it all the more interesting.
It's like a moving target some of the times.
Yeah,
you
but
think you have the
he
right
said
guy,
it's
but-
okay. But what do you say? Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Exactly. Just covering some of the themes that have been brought up here. Given where we are, how important now with recent events in Vegas this past fall, the Route 91 Festival, has risk assessment and safety elements have been brought to the forefront. Safety has always been a concern at outdoor festivals and events in general, but Route 91 kind of was like a paradigm shift because it was a situation where you never had to think about elevation before on an outdoor site, you know? Now that is being put into plans, and now it's kind of ruling out certain venues because, we have hotels around, and now Route 91 situation, we could have an active shooter in a hotel shooting on the site. So can you guys address what you have gone through or implemented in any of your areas in terms of risk assessment safety?
So, again, having done our festival for so many years in a park when things, were sort of a little more free and easy, there was very little planning around this for a long time. And really for us, it started after about 5 or 6 years ago when there was a rash of weather-related stage collapses. And so we started to take very seriously the issue of extreme weather and to create an emergency action plan or emergency evacuation plan based on that, and then sort of mirrored alongside of that a kind of a threat plan, but it all is rolled into what we now call an emergency action plan, and it's basically weather or threats. And the thing that I've learned that I would just share with everybody out there is it's really important to have one. It's really important to take the first steps to make one. And then it's really important to continue to learn about how to do it well and continue to revise it. It's a project that's never done. It's like you just have to keep doing it. And I'll just give a little example that might be useful for everyone and then just pass it down. But we started with a very big, long, detailed document that, it tried to think of every circumstance and realized you can't implement that. It's just too much information for your team to absorb. So we then got it down to a matrix. If this happens, then you do that. And then most recently, we literally have on our laminates an extra laminate for our team, and it breaks down their 2 or 3 steps in the process should we have an emergency evacuation. So it's boiling it down to really actionable steps for your team. And then the last thing is really to practice, which you can't do enough of. It's like the school fire drill.
To follow up on what you're saying, this is cheating a little bit because this is about 2 indoor shows that I've done. But I have been involved in the past 5 years in 2 events that kind of changed the way I looked at all this, especially with shooting. One, about 5 years ago, we were informed 2 days before the event that we were the target of a shooter, that they were looking for somebody who was coming to our event and that we would be targeted. And then I did the first show at Madison Square Garden after the Paris attacks, after the Bataclan. And in both, I sat with local, state, and in New York, federal authorities, joint terrorism, FBI. And what struck me most in both of these meetings was how nonchalant these guys were, how kind of okay, we get it, this is what's going on. And at first I was like, guys, there was just a shooting here, I have somebody coming after us, get involved, do something, help me. And then it really hit me, this is what they do for a living, every day. And every day they think about this, and every day they plan for it, and it's not like on Tuesdays they're not thinking about it, but Saturdays they are. And that's what we have to do as a group of people who put on shows and as a community. We have to make this a part of our lives and think about the terrible things, and as Jack said, practice it and have a plan. I think the laminate idea is a great one. But it's not enough to react to these things. They're going to keep happening. This is a country we live in. And if we just kind of let it go and then get completely outraged the week after and then try and make a plan, we're not doing ourselves a service, we're doing a disservice to our attendees. We need to each day have that plan and talk about it and refine it and talk to each other. That's the only way we can protect ourselves, and I think that's what we really need to focus on.
I totally agree. We have a 162-page emergency action plan that covers any slew of issues and incidents. It used to be that weather was the one that we all thought about, and now it's all of these other potential terrible things. Sharing that emergency action plan and going over it with the agencies that you work closest with, we found to be very valuable to go through the evacuation plan and how our security is going to react and just getting their feedback. Most of the time we get little to none, but so they know how we're communicating, so they know what our plans are, how our security is acting, is, we think, very, very valuable. And then making sure that our department heads know the plan, making sure that security department heads know the plan, making sure that actual security guards know the plan. It's amazing when you think about these larger events, there are 400, 500 security guards. And in any sort of terrible situation, patrons are going to be running up to them en masse. And making sure that security guard number 102 knows exactly where to direct people in the event of an active shooter or in the event of a weather evacuation is incredibly difficult, but you have to put the onus on the security company, and just making sure that they know everything and they can act and direct people in the best way possible.
Yeah, security at Fenway was beefed up to a private armed company in addition to the company that existed there. So, you know, the terrible thing about the active shooter is that it, just like the weather, you can't do anything about it. You can try to understand it, try to understand your action plan, but in the thick of it, I would imagine that the hysteria that's involved in the active shooter situation is difficult. So while we all make plans, what am I trying to say?
We're all screwed.
What's that?
We're all screwed.
Yeah, not screwed. It's the bitter pill we all have to swallow in this country. It sucks.
I guess I would just, because I'm luckily not as deeply involved in the logistics side, although obviously we are paying a lot more attention, a lot more assessment, a lot more training, a lot more consulting with PD about what is recommended, particularly for Central Park, which is sort of a natural, I don't want to even say the word out loud to empower it, but I do think deeply about how do you exist in this space of bringing people together and not live in fear. I was actually in Paris directly after that in a concert that happened just the night, I saw U2 in Paris the night after the attacks, and or shortly after. And, you know, I do think, although we have a responsibility to overdue diligence and making sure we can do everything we can, you also can't predict terrorism. You can't really protect yourself except to do the best job that you can, and that these type of events are really, really important to people, and they're really what brings us together in the best possible way, and that we can't let those types of acts of violence dictate that people can't have the joy of coming together and building community around music, which I think deeply is hopefully why we're all doing this. So I try to think more broadly and not go into the work with fear, because it seems palpable a lot of times directly when you do this work. But, you know, again, to do everything that you can to prepare, but then understand that we live in days and times where you can't prepare for the unexpected, and to try and just see the value in what you're doing as your biggest passion and really important to humans' lives.
Yeah, definitely well said. On a lighter note, what are some of the biggest rewards for you guys producing shows outside as opposed to in a normal venue?
You mean just in general or specific?
Just in general, just, you know, outdoor shows just have that extra something that makes it a little bit more special.
It's the weather again.
I'll go back to the weather.
You know, a beautiful night out under the stars, a great show that goes well and is a great performance is a super special thing. It's way different than being in here for a show, although being in here for a show is amazing. But it really is. It just has a different feeling. I think it goes to what Erika was saying. It is this sense of, I think the audience has a different sense of community and communal experience outdoors. It's a very, very different thing. I also think that for better or worse, people feel freer outdoors in a park. I often run into folks who think it's a park. I can do whatever I want. It's a very freeing kind of feeling. So I think that's the biggest thing in general, is that it just feels better. It feels different. It feels amazing. And even a show in a thunderstorm, back to rain for a second, I have a slogan I've been starting to use, which is rain or shine, and we mean it. Because we do our best to do the shows, but even in thunderstorm, I've done a show. We have a big venue, and I've done a show where it's pouring rain, nobody showed up, and we had 150 people right in front of the stage having a blast, soaking wet, and the band just played right through it, and it was amazing. And a full house, thousands of people in a thunderstorm, and people soaked and having a blast. So I just think in general, it's just the sense of being outdoors that is just a very, very different and very special element.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I mean, when it comes down to it, there's always been a connection between music and nature. There's whether it's playing guitar around a campfire when you're in summer camp, something else. There's something freeing about music. There's something emotional about it. There's something freeing and emotional about being outside. And then when you take it to the extreme, we've all been to places like Red Rocks or the Gorge. Just going to Red Rocks and standing on the steps is an experience. Then watching your favorite band play adds to that. I think there's something deeply rooted in human beings about being outside and connecting with music that is timeless.
I agree. There's definitely a palpable energy when people are outdoors and there's music playing. There's no doubt about it. And from the festival side of it, it's such a unique experience for the patron and the consumer, because you never know what the weather is going to be, whether it's super hot, super cold, raining, mud everywhere. It's an experience that they're never going to have again. And that lineup of bands, there's never going to all be together in the exact same way ever again. And just being able to go through that really, truly unique experience from a curating programming perspective to the weather and environment perspective, it just creates this magical vibe, this palpable energy that makes it so special. And that's why I think you see more and more outdoor shows in most markets, and consumers just love it, rain or shine.
Yeah, shows at Fenway Park are really unique. You go to a game there, and whether you're a ball fan or not, you're probably going to have a really good experience in a game. And so for the performers that show up there, they're excited to be there. It's either their first time or they're returning, because we do a lot of return acts over there. It's the experience. It's people have been seeing events there for over 100 years, and the concert thing is relatively new for the park, meaning like the last 15, 20 years. And the industry there is growing. We're doing more show nights there this year than in the first 10 years of events, barring baseball. So it's a great experience seeing a show over there.
Ditto to everyone. But I think for me, the additional thing that City Parks Foundation and SummerStage really thinks a lot about is being distinctly New York. And by location, both Central Park and the 15 other parks that we serve, there's something really unique about having an artist from a community go back and play in that community with a backdrop or just a feel that is something that's personal for them. So, we're doing concerts in, again, all 5 boroughs, but when we can connect an artist and have Queensbridge as the backdrop for an artist like Mobb Deep, who grew up in that neighborhood, who can't, perform the songbook in a more special way that's personally meaningful. And a lot of the way that we program is to really try and connect artists with community or parks specifically that resonate for them, and that's across the city. So, again, last year, one of our highlights was having La India in the South Bronx. And, we have artists cry because this is the neighborhood they grew up in, and there's 5,000 people that look like them in the neighborhood they grew up in, and now they've gone on to be around the world, and to come back with New York City as their home is there's nothing better. For Central Park, of course, I think it's another level of just resonance, and particularly in that case, both for New Yorkers, but also for international artists, who this is the pinnacle of them having arrived as a global artist, to be able to be in Central Park in New York City that holds such a high level of esteem. Again, we have artists from around the world who, remember seeing shows in Central Park, who just feel such a strong sense of arriving and a meaningfulness to playing in that particular space, because New York City really means something on a global scale. I mean, all of the places that we work, New York City just really holds a certain special place, and it translates in the way that people feel when they're performing here. And for me, that's really what's special about not just being in an outdoor setting, but also New York specifically.
Great. I think we need to open up the floor to some questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, my name's Neil. I'm from Ireland. We put on shows all across the country, and we run a music tech company as well. And I guess my question is for you guys, being from Ireland, you only usually get one night of good weather in the whole year. But when we are putting on events, we're always focused solely on the music, I guess, and then trying to find indoor spaces predominantly that work well. But if you guys, if you have time, could all give sort of the one most unique factor about the events you put on that sort of, for you, other than the music, makes your spaces and events so special. I've been to BRIC, and I think it's phenomenal. I haven't been to the rest of you guys, but sort of what is that one thing that sort of sets you apart?
I think everybody here would attest to the fact that you're trying to create, even though it's outdoors, you're trying to create an environment, sort of a unique voice for your space. I mean, obviously, what Pete and Charlie have done here is speaks volumes about how to do that. So I would suggest anybody who's doing things outdoors really think about their space and what's naturally there, and how best you can enhance it and make it special, and really make people feel like it's different. So just give a couple of simple examples at our place. We have both a hard surface with seats and a rear lawn, and it's actually punctuated and separated by a ring of pin oaks that were planted in 1930, and so they're giant. And so we light them, and it's an easy thing. You see it at Coachella, et cetera, but it really gives our space a unique character and a kind of signature. When you go there, it feels like our place. And, little things can make a big difference. I had a couple of these patio lights hanging in my backyard, and I went to my production manager and I said, just, put them over the whole audience. And we did that 10 years ago, and it's a kind of a signature, element of our experience when you walk in. So I think you should really just focus on the space and think about what's there and how you can enhance the experience and kind of create a unique look and feel for your space in the outdoors. It's a challenge, but you have a really unique opportunity there as well.
I guess when possible, and it's not always possible, matching the artist and the music with the venue in some real way. What Erika was saying about somebody coming home to play their neighborhood, it doesn't matter what the neighborhood looks like, it's the neighborhood. When we do a lot of nonprofit and cause-involved things, getting somebody that has something political to say down in D.C. across from the White House is something that they'll never forget, and nobody there will ever forget. And in other ways, just trying to use the venue. I mean, when you have a room like this, it is what it is. But when you're outside, you can be creative a little bit and say, okay, this artist has this to say, or this artist, the music evokes a feeling. And trying to match that with what you're putting on. I mean, you talk about curation. That's really, to me, when you can hit it the best. Whether it's a summer camp or a national monument, I think everything has its fit. Every event has its fit. And if you're going to go outside, try and find a locale that fits that event, and you'll do well.
I would say on the weather side of it, you're undoubtedly going to come across weather, whether it's lots of rain, high wind, what have you, and you have to weatherize your venue. And you have to make sure, however you do that, whatever kind of flooring you implement and you lay out, or whatever flooring you have on hold and reserve in the boneyard, that it complements the venue if it's a beautiful sunny day, or it complements the venue if it's a really terrible, terrible day. Finding out what parts of the site are susceptible to puddling. I keep saying mud because I've had such terrible experiences with mud, but you really got to make sure that you create this unique vibe with the venue just for the vibe, but also to make sure that the consumer experience is as good as possible, and you just protect yourself from those potential terrible situations weather-wise.
I think the biggest thing to make your event special is just be nice to your labor guy.
Spoken like a true labor guy.
Nobody likes the labor guy.
We all love you, Kurt.
Yeah. I think there's room for balance. What's your event about? Are you who are you catering to? You catering to your patron, your artist? Make sure you're catering to both. And I've been on shows where it's very lopsided, both ways. So balance.
I don't have a lot to add because we have really bare bones build out, mainly because we're in and out of a park within 4 or 5 days, a mobile stage, and a public space with no barrier, so there's no protection to whatever we would build. We're working deeply with community to do things on site, a lot of education, a lot of outreach, a lot of workshops. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve and what the goal of your festival is, but there's a lot of really interesting ways to bring community in, give them the ability to talk about what their issues are or learn or do things for young people, but in terms of physical structure, we don't do a whole lot.
Lucky you. Any other questions out there? Sir, over there.
Good morning. Thank you guys for your insight, by the way. It's been great. So my name is Jessica McCarthy. I work for an experiential agency here in Brooklyn. We work with a lot of large-scale brands and corporate entities that are going to be activating potentially in a park or looking to activate in a park. For them, I think the funds are there, and we often work with permitting expediters to sort of ease their process and sort of speed the process. But I do have a lot of friends that come to me outside of the business that are looking to activate in a public park in some way and have more limited funds or maybe looking, to do something that's cause-related. What sort of advice do you have for them in terms of not necessarily working with a permitting expediter because they don't have the funds to do that, but really building those relationships? I think a lot of times they don't know really where to start or who to go to. And how have you guys navigated that, or what advice could I provide to them?
I'll just say one thing. I do get calls frequently. I mean, there's a bit of a misunderstanding that we are the Parks Department, just for various different reasons. So the first thing is, again, you can do an event in any city park. It's certainly not easy, and certainly once you're doing like Gov Ball scale events or even SummerStage, that's a lot of other layers, but scalability, is a big part of it. But you can go to the Parks Department website right now. It's $50. You apply for the permit, and you can get a permit to do a small scale event. And in most parks throughout the city, they get very few permit requests. So it's not that hard to do. Again, for me, it's really always about community and what you're trying to do, and working with the channels that are already there. There's many parks groups that are looking to have events in their parks. They love even any level of support to even have something small scale. Once you talk about sort of more of the coveted parks where there's a lot more activity and a lot more permits and a lot more interest, that's when it starts to scale up in terms of the difficulty. But, you know, it really, in terms of actually just doing a small scale event in a neighborhood park in New York City, there's a very effective and very straightforward system that exists online. It's not cost prohibitive. But again, I think sometimes who are naive to what it takes to produce an event, yeah, you got the permit. Do you have a sound system? Do you have a stage? What's backline? You know, I mean, it really depends, and people are sometimes naive about what it takes to really even do a very small scale concert. But in terms of process and efficiency for something basic, I think it is very straightforward, and I would encourage people who want to do events, you know, that it's not actually that hard. Again, a scale aside.
Lead time, because
Lead
the
time,
Parks Department is notoriously slow.
Yeah.
But otherwise, she's absolutely right. The scale is the key. If you can keep it small, they want you. If it's big, it gets complicated fast.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. My name is Jim Faith. I run a small boutique festival out east. Hi, Tom. And I want to ask you, a decade ago at another conference that I was at, most of the festivals were not either taking out insurance or having a hard time getting paid. In this era, or in this time, I know that that's changed a lot. I'd like to hear what each of you are doing, what level of insurance you're taking out in terms of weather, terrorism. I mean, how far do you go?
You know, it's not my particular area of expertise. I work for a not-for-profit organization that has its own building, and so we have a single policy for everything that includes an umbrella. And if I'm correct, I think it's 5 million aggregate, 4 million occurrence, broad coverage, including all the types of risks that you named. But that's about as far as much as I know.
We're about the same, and we don't do weather insurance. We're rain or shine. So we don't do that type of insurance that some festivals, maybe you guys do. But we're rain or shine, and really rain until the last possible minute. We have to call it in the same way Jack is, so that only if it's electrical and only if it's called by PD within, 20 miles, whatever the rules are. But we try to make the show happen, and we don't hedge bets against, we don't insure against it not happening.
Yeah, but you have ticket revenue to think about.
I can't say enough about how important insurance is in the events business, especially if it's a for-profit show. It's saved my life a couple of times. Cancellation insurance especially. You can insure against expenses, you can insure against revenues. It could take you a really long time to get paid out, but if you were expecting to make whatever you were expecting to make profit-wise, and your insurance broker and agent are doing their job, you'll get paid out in full, what you were expected to make, which is huge. It's just something that we absolutely have to have in this day and age, because these events are so high risk. You just need to be able to, pardon my French, cover your ass, when that will eventually happen. And really getting into the nitty-gritty and understanding, what your cancellation insurance covers. I've never taken out rain insurance before because it's kind of like you're betting on getting rain. But cancellation insurance is something we've always taken out. We're required by the city to have a very high level of general liability, workers' comp, auto, et cetera. We do terrorism. And it varies year to year, and the promoter or producer has to make a call. In this day and age, I just always veer on the side of caution and take out as much insurance as possible. It's getting incredibly expensive because of all of these weather events happening everywhere and all of these terrible events. But it's still so important that it's just unfortunately one of those expense increases that you have to stomach.
And just as important as getting your own insurance, making sure that everybody that comes onto your site is insured. All of your vendors, volunteers, there are certain ways you can do that. But yeah, when something goes wrong, somebody's going to turn around and start pointing fingers, and you want to have everybody on your site covered, so that there's some relief from whatever you're going to do. So I agree with Tom. Insure everything you can. I've actually done the rain insurance thing and lost by 1/4 of an inch. So it is a little bit like gambling. But yeah, that's the biggest thing is getting vendors to understand that they have to get you named on their certs and reciprocal if they want. But making sure everybody's covered.
Any other questions?
Hey guys, Renee Portoff. I've worked with many of you and attended events at all of your properties. I think the one thing that I'm very curious about, and Kurt, this is for you, with Fenway being an older stadium that has not really made any changes as it's approached doing live concerts. When I attended Dead & Company 2 years ago, one of the things that really occurred to me on the differences between attending a concert at Citi Field or Yankee Stadium was the fact that your entranceways are pretty small and the security lines are intense. And I just wonder if you can talk about some of that, because I think it's fascinating that we're now attending live concerts at ballparks, especially Fenway being the historic one that it is. And I'm just kind of curious about the flow of traffic into your building for concerts specifically.
Well, the building wasn't designed for concerts, number one, and the area was not designed to facilitate the concerts. So, those are real challenges. The park works very hard to get people in and out as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. It's slow getting in. There's no two ways about it. They allow for that in the doors time.
You can't change
That's
Fenway
way
Park.
above my pay grade. I don't.
You can't change Fenway Park.
Jack said.
That's like, it's like you're talking about what they did to Yankee Stadium. It's like not good.
It's similar situations to the shows that are put on Wrigley Field in Chicago. It's just the park is 100 years old. It's a historic park. They're not gonna widen it, though the Ricketts family has done a lot of changes to Wrigley recently. But I mean, it's just one of those things where you need more lead time, as we discussed here, in getting people in properly and so on and so forth, so that it all goes into the planning aspect of that to make it as easy on the patrons as possible.
Hey, can I just say something? I get the sense we got to wrap up here, and I just want to make sure that I got this in. So I just want to give props to Charlie and Pete for doing this. And bringing, our industry together and this group of folks, mostly New Yorkers. But also, I just wanted to point to Charlie's opening remarks for those of you that were here. And I think it's really important for all of us to think about what he said, where he was really talking about the values that he and Pete have and the values they put into making decisions they made to build this place, and the choices they make and when they decide to say no and when they decide to say yes. I was so struck by those remarks, and I think that they are so, and I was just reminded of something similar yesterday with a sponsorship question and our values about sponsorship and when we say yes or no. I think that's the kind of thing that we all as professionals in this industry have to think about on a daily basis, whether it's your emergency evacuation plan, which maybe there's not so much values there. You just have it's black and white. But there's so many decisions we make, and I think if you make them based on your values and what you believe in and what you stand for and why you're doing this, I think it's going to go a long way towards your success. And I just want to thank Charlie for those fantastic opening remarks.
Definitely. Thank you, guys. Do we have time for one more, or are we good? We're done? All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.